All right, everyone, get ready for a wild ride. We're diving headfirst into Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2.
Yeah, strap in because it's a bumpy one. We're talking betrayal, ambition, all that juicy stuff. Think Game of Thrones, but with, more poetry.
And way more historical accuracy, right. Well, sort of. We're working with some really fascinating encyclopedia excerpts about the play.
Oh, absolutely. And trust me, there's a lot to dig into. We're talking about the Wars of the Roses, the House of York, the House of Lancaster.
It's a whole tangled web of power struggles, which actually makes it the perfect play for our deep dive.
Totally. So where do you want to start?
Well, I think the big question on everyone's mind is, why is Henry VI Part 2 considered one of Shakespeare's most brutal plays?
Oh, there's no shortage of violence, that's for sure. Shakespeare really lays bare the dark side of human nature in this one.
It's true, and what's interesting is that this was part of a tetralogy, a series of 4 plays that Shakespeare wrote early on in his career.
Really? I didn't realize it was that early.
Yeah, it basically made him famous. We're talking like instant celebrity status.
Wow, so he's just hitting his stride as a playwright and decides to tackle one of the most tumultuous periods in English history. Bold move.
Right. And with a massive cast of characters, too. Seriously, I think this play has the most characters of any Shakespeare play.
He really went all out. It's like he threw in every single character he could think of.
Yeah.
Kings, queens, nobles, rebels, even a witch or two.
Don't forget the witch. But for me, it's King Henry VI who steals the show. Talk about a character study.
Oh, yeah. What is it about him that you find so fascinating?
Well, just imagine. You're a deeply religious man, a man of peace, thrust into the role of king, leading a nation in turmoil.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The irony of it all. And our sources actually describe him as this pious, almost saint-like figure, completely devoted to his faith.
Which, sounds lovely in theory, but in practice, not exactly the best recipe for ruling a kingdom on the brink of civil war.
Yeah, piety doesn't really win battles or quell rebellions, does it?
Right. It's like trying to put out a fire with a prayer book. He's completely out of his depth.
And you can really see that tension between Henry's piety and the brutal realities of his reign play out throughout the entire story. It's like his faith becomes a tragic flaw.
That's a really interesting take. I never thought about it like that.
It's true. He's so focused on the divine, on doing what's morally right, that he completely misses the very real threats in front of him.
Which brings us to his wife, Queen Margaret, who is basically the opposite of Henry in every way. Ambitious, sharp as a tack, and willing to play dirty to keep her power.
Now, the relationship is fascinating. Talk about a study in contrast. You have Henry looking to heaven for guidance, and Margaret, with her feet firmly planted on the ground, playing the Game of Thrones.
Oh, their marriage is a powder keg just waiting to explode, but it makes for some incredible drama, that's for sure. And speaking of drama, we can't forget Richard, Duke of York, because this is where the whole Wars of the Roses thing really kicks off.
Ah, yes, Richard. The man who genuinely believes he's the rightful heir to the throne. He's a descendant of Edward III, just like Henry, but through a different lineage.
So it's not like he's just some power-hungry villain. He actually has a legitimate claim.
That's the thing. His claim is totally legit. He's not trying to usurp the throne. He believes it's rightfully his. And that's what makes the whole conflict so compelling. On one hand, you have Henry the crowned king, and then there's Richard, convinced that the throne should be his.
It's like a Shakespearean showdown waiting to happen. The House of York, represented by a white rose, versus the House of Lancaster, with their red rose.
And it's not just a battle between two families, right? Shakespeare does a brilliant job of showing how this power struggle at the top trickles down and impacts the lives of everyday people.
Exactly. And we see that most clearly through Jack Cade's rebellion.
Right. That's where things get really interesting.
So we're talking about a rebellion, but not just any rebellion, right? This is like a people's rebellion.
Oh, absolutely. It's the commoners, the everyday folks, rising up against what they see as an unjust system.
And it's easy to think about this stuff as ancient history, but then you dive into a play like Henry VI, Part 2, and you realize some things never really change, huh?
It's timeless, isn't it? That struggle against authority, that fear of societal collapse. Shakespeare really tapped into something universal with Jack Cade's rebellion.
And he took inspiration from a real historical event, too. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381.
Exactly. Although Shakespeare, of course, takes some creative liberties, as he does, he wasn't afraid to tweak things to make the story even more dramatic.
Well, he was a playwright, not a historian, right?
Exactly. And honestly, can you blame him? I mean, imagine trying to cram all the complexities of the Wars of the Roses into a single play.
Talk about a challenge. But seriously, did people back then ever get annoyed by those historical inaccuracies?
You know, it's funny you should mention that. Sadly, we don't have any records of Elizabethan theater critics complaining about historical inaccuracies.
Too bad. I would love to read those reviews.
Right. Shakespeare, your timeline is all wrong.
But we do know he relied heavily on historical chronicles for his source material. He was working with what was available at the time.
Absolutely. Like the chronicles written by Edward Hall and Raphael Hollinshead, those were like his go-to sources for all things history. But Shakespeare wasn't afraid to, let's say, embellish a bit for dramatic effect.
Give us an example. What kind of embellishments are we talking about?
Well, take the Jack Cade Rebellion, for instance. Historically, that happened years before the First Battle of St. Albans. But Shakespeare, he puts them back to back.
To really crank up the tension.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, look at how quickly things can spiral out of control. And it works. It keeps the audience on the edge of their seats.
Talk about a masterclass in storytelling. He knew exactly how to keep people hooked. But it's not just the plot, right? Shakespeare's language, the way he uses words, is just
otherworldly, yeah.
It's like he's painting pictures with his words, you know? Suddenly you're not just reading a play, you're right there in the middle of the action, feeling everything the characters feel.
He does that so brilliantly by giving each character their own distinct voice. You could practically hear the ambition in Richard's voice, the desperation in Henry's prayers.
And the way he contrasts the language of the court with the language of the common people.
Oh, absolutely. It's like he's highlighting the vast gulf between those two worlds. Like when Suffolk announces Margaret's arrival to the court, it's all flowery and formal, right?
Like he's reading from a Hallmark card.
Exactly. But then you have Jack Cade rallying his rebels, and it's raw, it's visceral, it's powerful.
Totally. Two different worlds colliding head on.
And it's not just about social class either. Shakespeare uses language to distinguish between characters within the same social sphere, too.
You know, I have to admit, I always found Henry's constant quoting of the Bible a bit much.
A bit preachy.
Yeah. Like, come on, Henry, lighten up a bit. But now I'm realizing that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Right. His reliance on religious language betrays his naivete. He's trying to apply piety to a situation that demands ruthlessness. He's completely out of his element.
Especially compared to someone like Margaret, who's not afraid to use language as a weapon.
Oh, she wields it like a sword, doesn't she? And that scene, you know, the one after Gloucester's murder, her epic rant, pure Shakespearean brilliance.
Chills. It's like she's trying to out-Shakespeare Shakespeare with her grief. Or does it anger? Or maybe even guilt?
See, that's the beauty of it. He leaves it open to interpretation.
He makes us think, makes us question. It's amazing.
Exactly. He's not just telling a story, he's inviting us to explore these complex characters and their motivations. And let's be real, there's no shortage of motivation in this play.
Power, love, revenge. They're all vying for control.
And those desires, those urges, they often manifest in violence, which, let's be honest, is kind of a recurring theme in Henry VI Part 2.
No kidding. We've got everything from whispers of witchcraft to full-blown murder, and we haven't even gotten to the actual Wars of the Roses yet.
And it's not just there for shock value, right? Shakespeare uses violence strategically to highlight just how fragile order is.
Yeah, one wrong move, one bad decision, and boom, everything descends into chaos.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, what is it about power that can corrupt even the most well-intentioned people?
That's a question for the ages, isn't it? And it makes me think, why should we, sitting here in the 21st century, care about a play written over 400 years ago? What can we possibly learn from this world of kings and queens and constant power grabs?
Well, that's the magic of Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
He understood something timeless about human nature, that deep down, the things that motivated people back then aren't so different from what motivates us today.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own society, warts and all.
Exactly. And for me, one of the biggest takeaways from Henry VI, Part 2, is the importance of strong leadership, or rather, the dangers of weak leadership.
But we see that with Henry, right? He's a good man, but completely outmatched by the challenges he faces.
He hesitates, he second-guesses himself, he's paralyzed by his own piety. And that creates a vacuum that allows ambition, and ultimately chaos, to thrive.
It's a sobering reminder that leadership isn't just about having a fancy title. It's about making tough calls, inspiring others, and putting the needs of the many above your own desires.
Well said. And honestly, that's a message we could all use a little more of these days.
Amen to that. So there you have it, folks. Another deep dive into the world of Shakespeare, complete Hopefully, you've walked away with a newfound appreciation for Henry VI, Part 2.
And maybe even a little bit of wisdom for navigating the complexities of our own time.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, everyone, happy reading.